really coming up with high-level leadership principles and creating their North Star. An example of a company who's done this is Amazon. If you look up on their website, you'll see what their leadership principles are in terms of what they track down to and what they make everyone learn. So all the leaders in their organization do have to have special training in all of these leadership principles, and everyone in the organization needs to be aware of what they are, just so that they are all really tracking to the same types of goals and that they do things the same way as an organization. And you can see some of the leadership principles here for them in terms of really being customer centric, being obsessed with the customer, things about hiring and developing the best, higher standards, earning trust, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all very important principles for Amazon and something that they track to. A lot of other large companies like Salesforce and Google and Facebook all also have their leadership principles posted. If you look on their website, they do have it public so that everyone understands what they're really tracking to. And again, when they're training employees, they have them also make sure that they really know what these things are. So mapping principles to action. So we talked about really having the North Star in place and then having principles. So really mapping the principles to actions is a collaborative exercise that leaders need to do. So there's lots of different sessions that can take place. I've worked with a lot of leadership teams in terms of mapping strategy and really coming up with their North Star objectives, and then going in and mapping the tactics. But often you might get in long sessions, maybe 2-3 days where you're doing Kaizen mapping on the wall. You're really talking about what drives not only the customers, but also what drives the organization internally. And then the leaders will start to map out what their top principles are. And then they'll start to create work streams and actions based on these principles. And then they'll end up tracking the principles, publishing them, and then making them available to all the employees as well, and definitely very well communicated throughout the team. So again, it is a very collaborative exercise. And a lot of times the leadership team, the stakeholders, and sometimes they might even bring in customers in place. And a lot of this type of planning sessions came from really the lean days when they would do Kaizen mapping and things like that, in terms of really doing sort of a high-end strategy and then getting into your lower level tactics. And then there are lots of tools that you can use. There's Hoshin X planning. There's the North Star visioning. Lots of type of strategy sessions. And then I mentioned Kaizen. But again, you get into this and then you decide what the organization's North Star is, what their top leading principles. And then once you get into that, then you can start to map out some work streams. And if you're doing scaled agile, then this is where you would start to map out your initiatives. You would start to map out your value streams after that and everything else. But you would have to start out with the core principles. So the why of this, the project management or the PMBOK, the newer version, is actually making a dramatic change. It is going to go to a principle-based approach. And the reason for this is to embrace a hybrid model. Right now, the current project management body of knowledge does not really support anything other than waterfall projects. And so, keeping in mind how important principles are, they've taken a look at a lot of the Agile and the Scrum principles, and they ended up doing a rewrite of the PMBOK version 7. And I was part of the review team for this, so I know a lot about what's coming out with this. And so this is a little bit about, what had been going on previously. So previously, the version 6 of the PMBOK had been very prescriptive, not really descriptive. Now it's going to have a core set of principles to really guide mindset and actions. And it's going to be very open in terms of the ones that project managers choose. And it'll be perfect for agile and hybrid models. So that's really great. And then it is a focus on the project outcomes in terms of the metrics that are set and in terms of the North Star visioning that you would track to with those principles in addition to the deliverables. So once the principles are chosen, then there is a focus on the outcomes. Then of course, in an internal and external project environment, again, any project can use this principle-based approach. And then the target audience is anyone that's involved in the project and really looking at different team roles, including the leads, the sponsors, and the product owners. So again, embracing the agile models. And then again, the degree of change is the principle-based model. So it's a dramatic change. And then there's guidance in terms of how you would apply those principles to your environment. So it will provide the principles, and then it will also provide some specific tailoring guidance in terms of how to do that. And if we look at the next slide here, you're going to see some of the major differences here between the 6th edition of the PMBOK and the 7th edition. So for those of you who are know a bit about the book, there is 10 knowledge areas currently in version 6 of the PMBOK. The most recent one was stakeholders, which really came out of communication. So, you know, it was required that a brand new knowledge area was added. And what's going to end up happening now is that that's going to go into performance domains to support the agile and the hybrid environments. And you see them listed here in terms of team, in terms of stakeholders, in terms of a life cycle, and to support the agile and iterative life cycles, to support planning for multiple types of projects, to support navigating uncertainty and ambiguity, delivery, and all the different delivery methods in terms of supporting DevOps and all of the other types of test-driven environments that agile environments would cover. And then performance and project work. And then if you see here on the left side, for those of you who are have background in PMP or anything like that with the PMBOK, you know that there's 5 areas for project management right now, which are the initiating, the planning, the executing, the monitoring, and controlling, and the closing. That is also dramatically going to change to, again, the principle-based approach. And these are some of the principles here. Again, they came from a very agile-like mindset. And so the reviewers did review a lot of the agile principles in order to come up with this, along with just finding things that would fit this. And again, the focus will be on value. And the reason that I mentioned this here in this presentation is when we do get into the exercise, you're going to look at principles and you'll look at the wall on Miro, but just keeping in mind that this is what ended up happening with the new PMBOK is some great background in terms of what's really important about principles and different ways that they can be applied. So for those of you who, you know, would be using the PMBOK 7th edition, this would help you to, you know, have some context in terms of how you can support a principle based environment. So let's get into the Miro board. Hang on a second here. I want to, whoops, wrong link here. So I have the board link here that everyone should have. And let's see, let me go into the chat here and make sure that everybody's got the Miro board. Does everybody have it? Can everybody get into the link? Not sure if anybody's there or not there. I'm not seeing any faces on the screen.
Gail, actually, I'm using my mobile and it's not allowed on my official laptop. So apologies, I cannot access it. I'll just observe.
Okay. What about everybody else? Who else is?
I got the link, so I'm accessing it.
I can walk you through the board too. It looks like I might just have to walk you through the board in terms of showing you. Okay, that's fine. So just to show you here, rather than, okay, I do see some people that are in here. What you have here, and if you were doing the exercise, is that you would go in and observe, right? You take a look at the principles wall, and then you go in and take a look at the different principles in terms of Scrum, Agile, Modern Agile, XP, which are some of the ones that I have here. So I'll just walk everybody through this. So what I have here, and rather than doing this all through slides, is we'll just do this through the Miro board. So what you've got here are the 6 principles of Scrum, and I can just walk you through these since it seems like this needs to be more of a guided exercise. So what individuals would do is that they would look at all these different items on the board, and then they would decide which ones were resonant to them and then choose a subset that are resonant. When you look at the Agile ones, then you've got continuous software delivery, the changing requirements, deliver working software frequently, collaborative software development, simplicity, etc. Then you've got Modern Agile here, which is shorter and sweeter, right? The making safety a prerequisite, which is an important addition to Modern Agile. And then you've got some of the XP principles in terms of redundancy, in terms of flow, right? Reflection, mutual benefits, failures. You've got Spotify principles, which these are the design principles in terms of being relevant, human, unified. And then you've got some of the different ones for Discipline Agile here, which the be awesome, right? The delight customers, the pragmatism, optimizing flow, etc. And then what you would end up doing is, oh, somebody moved my title. I was wondering what happened to it. It's like, wow. Then you've got scaled Agile. So as you know, there's 10 principles around the scaled Agile here. And so then you see them all here. Then you've got the ones that are less principles, etc. So what I do for my class is that students would look at this, right? They break out in groups and they look at these, and then they start out by selecting 5 that are the most resonant with them, and then they would build a board. So basically, whoop, now I'm moving it too. Then what you end up doing is you track down here. See, we get into here. And then say, for example, I give an exercise where I tell people, let's be like the next Facebook. Your directive or your North Star is to create an application where you build social value. And then you've got your principles backlog. So what you would do is then you would select 5 principles, like from all of that wall, like which ones are the most resonant for you and which ones would actually you know, be the driving factors. And then you would select the one that would be your North Star. So in this case, this group actually said organize around value would be their guiding North Star, and then they picked other ones. And then from there, so that's like the first iteration. So the first iteration is to select the 5 principles. The second iteration is to select the one that's the most resonant. And then what you end up doing is then you can start out with one of the principles and then say, now what are all the things that you're going to do to actually track and map to that? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
So just looking at all these, if you were to build a board, and we could just make this a little bit more interactive since it's just a very small group. How many people are actually in here? 4, right? Looks like there's only 4. Okay. So can anybody tell me a principle that they would use if you were? What I might do is just throw you, the people that are in here, in the breakout, and then have you do this. Or actually, I don't need to throw you in a breakout. You're here. So why don't you as a team, the 4 people that are here, go through the wall and then decide together what 5 principles you would choose and have one person be the scribe on the board. I'll let you do this and we'll just stay in this session so that you can. Any takers? Yeah, and you can go ahead and just put them anywhere, but Manish, what are you coming up with?
Yeah, I haven't used Miro right till now, so I'm just getting the feel of the usage of
Oh, okay, sure.
Miro.
Do you need
So I
some
think
help?
primarily the principle which I was thinking, in whatever practical knowledge we have implemented, is the trust and respect. I think those are the 2 basic principles. If they are there already, so those are the 2 key things. But yes, I'm just going through the Miro to see, to understand it more.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and take a few minutes. It takes a while to like actually look at everything and see what's resonant to you. When I do this in a session, I actually put everything up on the walls within a in a real room, and then it's a lot more impactful for everyone to look at the wall. And then I break people into teams when I have usually I have a much larger group. Break people into teams, and then they get their directive, which say you're the next Facebook and you're going to create an organization to build social value. Now, what are the different things that you would do?
Yep. Yeah, it looks fantastic to work on this. So I'll start using this.
Yeah, just take a few minutes and look at this. I'm just trying to get some interaction. Anyone else? What principles ring out to anyone? Radovan, I think I see you in here with your name.
Yeah, give me a minute, please.
Oh, sure.
So is it something we need to drag and drop the principle, or how is
Just create a new one. So just create a new card in terms of which ones are more relevant to you, and just put them down below in the exercise area.
okay?
Yeah, you can even just put them like right below this, but yeah, don't copy them because I tried to lock them all down, so. Yeah, I have a Menti poll too at the end that will ask about them, but I want to get you used to the board as well. Is everybody doing okay on the board, or do you need me to help you figure out how to use the Post-its or anything? And sometimes people choose principles all from one methodology. So you can certainly break out and say, you know, you really like all the Spotify ones and you would choose all of those for your 3 to 5. Or some people do modern agile, or some people do discipline agile, or you could actually conduct a mix or match. And just while you're on the board, just to show you some examples of what other people have done, I've done visioning sessions with leadership where they've actually created their whole mission statement, right, and their values based on coming up with a principle. So going through this wall and then really coming up with a whole high-end look at their organization. They ended up saying trust was their most important North Star value here. In this case, this was a COVID-19 nonprofit that I worked with the leadership team to come up with their North Star, along with coming up with their core values, with their, you know, with all of their processes and things like that. But you could see here that it really got very involved. So it can get like super granular in terms of how you end up doing things. So you start out with just some simple principles in terms of what you're doing, and then you actually come into your solutions and into your outcomes. So I think this is important to show you. And this was all in Miro. So you can see all of this here for the most part. Again, this took, you know, weeks to come to this point. So again, you can get into some really high-end workshops, but how you start out is always with just a handful of the principles that you think are the most important ones, and then you start to iterate from there in terms of getting really granular. The other demo that I can show you here was also for a class. So this was one here, you see the wall here. And this was what a class came up with at UC Extension in terms of creating a doorway product, which was a platform to empower young professionals to have control over their financial security. And so then these were the principles that they chose. So they said simplicity was their North Star.
Hey, Gail, we still see the mural board only. If you're showing us another browser on we still see the same one. Is that just for me?
Oh, okay. All right, hang on a second. Let me get back to that then. Sorry. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, apologies. I had specifically chosen the Miro board for. Thank you for pointing that out, because it is important that you see this. So this is an example of when one of my classes came up with this. They came up with a doorway product where they actually chose simplicity as their North Star. So you see here that was their top principle. And then working software was number 2. Continuous improvement was number 3. Feedback was number 4. Experimenting, learned rapidly, 5, and then so on. So they came up with a pretty simple solution. And then they started to iterate on that in terms of now for each one, then what were all the items that they would end up doing. So that's how this works when you're actually doing it. And then they end up, you know, creating a whole mission statement, etc. So I had them create a whole mission statement around this. So they started out with the same wall, right? I think there's a few differences, but for the most part, they started out with a wall of values where they're looking at all of the values, and then they chose the ones that were most resonant to them, and then actually started to track a whole, excuse me, a whole application.
Hi, I
Is
have a
this-
question here. Can I?
Sure, please.
Okay. Yeah. So, for example, if you're doing Agile and if you're using Scrum as a methodology, then Agile has the principles, and there are something in Scrum also which I've listed, right? So why should we still go ahead with looking at the other principles and finding out what is our north? I mean, if you're doing only Agile and Scrum, if you do XP, then XP principles, of course, we may have to look. But if you're not doing disciplined Agile, or if you're not doing the Spotify, then should we restrict to only the Agile and Scrum principles? Just curious on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so basically, this isn't just really down at the low level where you're just working with development teams. This is actually up at the higher level, usually with leadership teams when they're tracking their strategy, right, and their higher level strategic roadmap. So the framework that they're using doesn't really matter. What they're doing is they're creating that North Star vision, and then they're creating the strategic roadmap. So that's the difference. Now in execution, like say their development department, you know, maybe one team uses all Scrum, maybe another team uses Kanban or something else, but that doesn't really have to do with what they're doing here. You're actually creating your high level mission statement here, and then your strategy map for how you're getting there. So it's a little bit higher up. So it's more the 10,000 foot view rather than the granular view. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in that case, the principles that they can come up with can be totally different from what is listed. And maybe these principles can be used as the basis, and they can come up with
It could,
totally
yes, definitely. There could be other ones that aren't here. This is just a starting point for conversation. You could certainly put people in front of a wall, and then you could certainly say, yes, if there's something that's not here that you think would fit your organization, you know, like for example, with the Amazon ones that I showed you, some of those weren't definitely here, but yes, definitely. It doesn't necessarily have to be all these here, but when they're looking at a wall, at least they're starting with something, right?
Yeah. So at the same time, we also said that, okay, Amazon's 14 principles are there, and likewise, we have Google's, Facebook's principles as well, right? So will that
Yes,
also
definitely. They all do. Salesforce, all of those have their high level principles that they map to.
So will it? Yeah. So will it be a good point to start with Amazon's, Salesforce, Facebook, Google? Look at their principles and then pick and choose from there as well. Will that also be a good starting point?
You could, or for example, when I do my exercise in class, so going back to the Miro board here, the exercise that I actually give in my class is the directive is the same as Facebook's directive. So Facebook's North Star is to build social value. So if you look at the Facebook site, you'll see that that's what it says. So what I do is tell the class, you are building a new social media site, right? That's going to create social value for the customer. Now, what are the starting principles that you would want to use? So you certainly could use a case study example like that from one of the existing companies that's out there as a starting point. I wouldn't necessarily like just copy all of their principles, but you could certainly start with their North Star. You know, again, though, you know, each company does something a little bit differently, and that's kind of their secret sauce. I'm sure there are some companies that just copy Amazon exactly, you know, but generally when I do the exercise for people, then what I do is have them come up with their own principles.
Got it. Thank you.
And when I do the class, so yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Good question. And just to show you the other one, since apparently you weren't able to see it, my apologies for that. I think I was just getting granular with the Miro board. This is an example, again, of an organization where I worked with the executives, to actually map out their North Star and come up with a higher level vision here. So if you see here, this back into There we go. They ended up revolving theirs. Their North Star was trust. And then now they created all the processes and things around that. And then they started to build out their principles. So here you see all the things they did. And then they said who they serve, their education, they're producing solutions. And then they ended up coming up with mapping out what their actual metrics would be, et cetera, et cetera. So you can really get deep into this. Again, with Miro, it is, definitely very creative how you start out, but you can certainly sort of break things out. So these were like some of their first principles that they chose, the internal efficiency and efficacy, modularity, accessibility and accountability, creation of value, et cetera. And then they went from there. So you just end up getting into deeper and deeper idea mapping. And then as you iterate, you get more and more granular as you do this exercise. That makes sense to everybody?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you see here in this example, what they ended up doing, a high level mission statement in terms of what Doorway does. Sorry, they used a canvas here. Their mission was to provide an inclusive platform to empower young professionals to have greater control over their financial security and its future. Then they were creating their lean agile center of excellence. They ended up doing SAFE. They created a stakeholder map here where they actually, mapped out who they would have to challenge and et cetera. And then they got into all of the different things that were out of scope, their responsibilities, et cetera. So as they went through the iterations of this, and this was a several day workshop, then they started with the principles, but then they started to iterate on what the tasks were, what the metrics were, what the specific outcomes could be. Let's go back to the Miro board and see what we've got here. So I know we've got some people that, so in terms of principles, what did anybody say? I think you've had some time now to do this while I've been talking. Who would like to speak? It looks like we've got some stuff here. Who has delight customers? No one wants to speak? Okay, so it looks like we have delight customers. Somebody wrote, somebody else wrote just working on stuff, focus on value, however defined, building projects around motivated individuals. Everybody's quiet. How come everyone's so quiet? Oh, somebody's So out of all of these methods in terms of Agile, which ones are the most resonant to the group? I'm just curious. Which ones do you usually tend to go towards? Do you like the scaled Agile? Do you like less? Do you like discipline Agile? Is there any specific framework you lean towards more with in terms of usage at work?
I guess it's,
Yeah, go ahead, Nikita.
yeah. So I guess it's more of Scrum. I think that's the most common one. And I have, like we use Scrum in our organization and I've seen Scrum mostly used everywhere.
Yeah, same here. We're now making a transition towards a scaled agile. Like I work with a consulting firm, Gail. So now we've recently started, getting our hands dirty, if that's a statement I can use, in the scaled agile framework. So I've just recently got my certification. So we're now trying to move towards that.
Got it. Yeah, and I mean, usually for most transformations too, they really need to get Scrum practices right. If they don't have
Right.
Scrum practices right, then they can't really get anything else right. So, So even before you would go to Scaled Agile or any of the scaling frameworks, if you're not really doing Scrum or practicing Scrum correctly, then you're not really, you're not really doing that much. But looking at the values definitely, in terms of Scrum then, so if we narrow down on that.
Just a quick time check, Gail. We are 5 minutes short, I guess. I think I'm just checking so that we're not missing out on any pieces.
Okay, so there's only 5 minutes to go. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, got it. All right. For some reason, I thought I was going till 7, so that's good to know.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Okay, so let's just do this then. Let's do the Menti poll quickly. So apologies for that, folks.